Nick Corby from ELG Utica Alloys, Mike Wilkes from Chimera International, Takeshi Nakashima from Toho Titanium, and Dr. Niels Backenberg from Project Blue. So here to kick us off with titanium feedstocks update is David McCoy, Executive Chairman of TZMI, a global consulting company with expertise in the global titanium dioxide and sponge markets. Please welcome David McCoy.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So it happens yet again, I'm shorter than the rostrum, so I'll be standing here. Otherwise I can't see my own slides. So thank you everyone for coming back from lunch and listening to this panel. We all appreciate it. So I'm going to focus on the titanium minerals industry. TZMI is a consulting company, been around since 1994. We do the whole value chain from sponge upstream to mining and also through the titanium dioxide pigment industry. So just to remind everyone, because sometimes people forget where titanium comes from. A lot of the people in the conference here are dealing with mill products and things that are made from mill products and supply demand of this material, and we talk about aerospace buy rates and fly rates and build rates and all those sort of things, but mill products obviously are not where titanium comes from. It's not the forged products as well. It's not the ingot and slab, even though a lot of people do look at that as the start of the supply chain. It's certainly where the scrap gets recycled back into the sector, but just remember the scrap's just the stuff going around in circles. Every bit of titanium that ends up in a piece of something out there needs new titanium to come in. That comes in through sponge, but sponge doesn't grow on trees. So you have to mine titanium. It comes out of the ground, just like iron ore, copper, lead, zinc. It's the 9th most abundant mineral in the world. There's titanium everywhere. It's just that it's not always economic to pull out of the ground. There's 2 types of main mines that are around the world. The top mine, which is a big open cut hard rock deposit, Norway, China, Canada. These are deposits where the mineral is quite unweathered and reactive, and then over millions of years, as these mountains and rivers go through them and they wash and erode, you get riverbeds or old seabeds and seashores that are deposits of titanium. So that stuff on the top there washes down, gets more weathered, which means more oxidized. And we have mining operations all over the world where typically we're either dredge mining like this or we just scrape the sand off the ground. So that's where your titanium comes from. It's a critical mineral. Maybe not one of the most critical and the most short, but people are understanding that titanium supply chains are unique, and geopolitical issues can certainly play a cause in this. So mining projects, if you think investing in a new EB furnace is hard, try and get financing for a new mining project. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It can take a few years, and a few years might be 5 years. It can take 15 years. It could take forever. Particularly if you do an environmental review and they find something on the ground that can never be moved. But there's all these phases of a mining project that you have to step through, and each of those phases is a valuation of what you've got, what you think you've got, how you define it, how you can be more sure about what you've got, and how you can be more sure that you're going to make money at the end. Plenty of mining projects in the world. You get through this phase, lots of investors put money in. 5 years down the track, everyone's broke, and it's the next guy that comes in and buys the facility and the mine that actually makes the money. But what I wanted to emphasize here is this is a long period of time, typically 8 to 15 years from finding something and evaluating it, developing it. So there's not always ample supply of what you need just waiting to come onto the market. So if we talk about typically the sand deposits, they're not just titanium. They are a mixture of minerals. Each of those minerals has a value, and each deposit has a different mixture. And that could be titanium minerals, but also can be other things like monazite, rare earths, rutiles, which is titanium, quartzes, garnets, all sorts of things. And the mineral industry that is feeding the titanium sponge needs to extract the valuable minerals out of those deposits in an economic way. And whether one deposit is economic versus another is based on the processes required to do this, but also what is the value of the minerals at the point in time that you're getting the funding. So they don't all move in the same direction, so it can be quite interesting what product gets up and what doesn't. The two main minerals that go into the titanium supply chain, the base minerals are ilmenite and rutile. Ilmenite has a large spectrum of TR2 content from roughly 43, can be a little bit lower in some of the rock deposits, up to 65, 68% TR2, and typically that gets beneficiated to a higher mineral before it gets put into the reduction furnaces to make the tickle, to make the sponge. Rutile, it's much better, 95% TR2 out of the ground. So you'd love to use this stuff, but there's not enough of it around. So that's the problem we have. We've got the gold standard, but we just can't find it, extract it, and we've got to use the other stuff. So so it makes clarification when we talk about, because all these minerals have different amounts of titanium in them, when we try to do mass balances or sums of supply and demand, we have to equate it back to some common unit. So the common unit is what we call the Ti2 unit, which is just basically how much of, what's the mass of titanium dioxide equivalent in 1 tonne or 1,000 kilograms of the mineral. So example there, 1 tonne of ilmenite with a 50% TR2 content is half a TR2 unit. So we get the ilmenite and typically run it through electric arc furnaces. You get iron metal and you get slag. That slag you will then chlorinate to titanium tetrachloride, and then the titanium tetrachloride you reduce with magnesium to titanium metal. Very simple, very easy, no problems at all. It's actually really complex and quite difficult to do. Just a slide of the typical spectrum of high-value minerals that are used. I'll leave that for reference. So we have the sponge plants all over the world, and there's a couple of idled plants there. You can see they're all typically in the northern hemisphere and very much focused on the Russia through Kazakhstan into China and Japan. I want to focus on today, the mineral that's used in the titanium industry does come from all over the world. But if I was to forecast out 10, 15 years of where it's going to progressively come from, it's mostly going to be coming out of Africa. And so I just wanted to focus on what's in Africa and what's being produced at the moment, and give you some highlights of what could be coming in the future. Africa, 54 independent countries that all have varying levels of mining, understanding and jurisdiction. Places like South Africa, very developed. And then there's other countries where you want to start a titanium mine, you have to help the government write the mining laws to then be able to go and do the first mine. Okay, the most developed of the supply chain in Africa is coming out of South Africa. Slag, there's about 1 million tonnes of Richards Bay slag capacity and about 400,000 tonnes from the American company Tronox. Most of it goes into the pigment industry, and this is all built on low-cost power from the 1980s and beyond. Madagascar, there is a mine in Madagascar owned by Rio Tinto again. It puts out a huge amount of high-quality ilmenite. A lot of it does come up to Canada for smelting. But again, this is an example of $1 billion of investment that had to happen. The ports, the roads, everything had to be built to create this investment. Kenmare is a major supplier to the slag industry around the world. and a progressive supplier that you'll see for the slagging plants that are, there's one in Saudi Arabia and there's one being built in Oman. So that ilmenite comes from this, a lot of it comes from this mine here. Again, been around for a long time, putting out about 1 million tonnes a year, and required a lot of local investment. And what has been happening, particularly on that coastline of Mozambique, is there's progressively been Chinese companies coming in and less developed investment, so not going to full scale in terms of the product separation. So they don't get all that mixture I showed, and they don't break it into all its components at the mine there. They actually concentrate it up and send it to China and then do the separation there. Sierra Leone has been a backbone of rutile supply in the world. Sierra Leone as a country has been through some problems in the 90s. An Australian company, Aluka, took control of it in 2016, but has been spun off. So now we're looking at a company that needs to keep reinvesting, but it's a much smaller organisation. Eramet, the French company in Senegal, massive supplier of ilmenite up to Norway, which goes into the smelters there. Egypt's coming on. The military in Egypt owns all the mineral rights, and so there's been development there. There's a lot of mineral that's starting to come out of Egypt on the Mediterranean coast, and it's heading predominantly to China. Nigeria, a little bit more undeveloped. Companies, predominantly Chinese companies, have been paying low-cost workers in Nigeria to extract ilmenite. It is being cracked down on, but that's where some of the titanium comes from. And there's a big old list of projects. I want to focus on Ukraine as well. The map here gives you some of the deposits. You've got Kyiv and you've got ZTMK, which is at the bottom of the Dnipro River. And then you've got the current occupied regions for Russia in the red there. So all those yellow areas, they're all titanium deposits of varying quality, but in general, they're all very good quality. There's some really, really good rutile deposits in Ukraine, and the problem is that it's near on impossible to finance a new project. There are some Ukrainian companies that are still operating or have managed to restart again since conflict started, but certainly no one's going to put money into developing some of these other projects until things quieten down. So looking at the supply demand, and this presentation will be available for download. So looking at supply demand there, we've got has been presented before, but there's a massive kick up of supply out of China for sponge. Much less in the CIS, and predominantly it's come down because of what's happening in Russia and the curtailments there of production. But increasingly, China has become the supply base of a global sponge industry, and most of that stays within China, or has historically stayed within China, but we are seeing more of it starting to move out to the world. So translating that requirement for sponge back to the mineral, there's different types of mineral that are required, but predominantly the chloride slag. So there's the material I talked about in South Africa, there's stuff in the Middle East, Norway. That material is quite a base load, and some of the plants in Kazakhstan, in Russia, they make their own chloride slag. This sulfate slag, the green, that's a result, that's a lower quality slag that's made in China, so that's directly related to the Chinese consumption. Stepping up to the global minerals, so this is not just for titanium metal, this is including all the pigment and everything else. There certainly has been, because of the weakness in the pigment industry, there's been an oversupply of mineral for the last 2 or 3 years, which is cumulatively, about 1.35 million tonnes of TR2 units. That's built up. We are seeing some miners like Aluka in Australia is taking down supply for next year. So we are seeing action to stop the continued build-up of oversupply, and we're going to go through a few years of undersupply, but it's going to take a couple more years before we get into balance regarding where the overproduction has been. And my last slide is, if you want to know more about titanium minerals, we all get together this year again in Kuala Lumpur in November. There'll be about 300 to 350 of the mining industry, and you can hear about all the mining supply of mineral around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, David. All right, this leads us into the discussion on titanium sponge. I'd like to introduce Mr. Takeshi Nakashima, Executive Officer and Deputy General Manager of Toho Titanium's Titanium Division. Please welcome Mr. Nakashima.
Thank you, Andy, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you have had a wonderful time here in Boston. First, presentation disclaimer. Then I'd like to start explaining titanium sponge demand outlook. Global demand for titanium sponge remains flat, impacted by aerospace supply chain disruption and the slowdown of China's economy. Global air passenger traffic has hit a record high, marking a full shift from recovery to sustained growth and driving a corresponding increase in aircraft demand. However, both OEMs have struggled to ramp up production, and their backlogs continue to accumulate. China's economic recovery remains incomplete. No one knows when it complete, and demand growth for titanium products in the industrial sector is losing momentum. So this graph shows titanium sponge demand estimation. Last year and this year, sponge demand might really grow from 2023. Aerospace sponge demand is projected to grow, but current data show slow recovery. Now I focus on sponge demand in the aerospace sector. Supply chain disruption in the aerospace sector are limiting growth in titanium sponge demand. Delays in non-titanium components have slowed Airbus production, causing titanium inventory to build up. The Boeing strike last year continued to suppress demand for aerospace applications, and the timing of sponge demand recovery remains uncertain. Given the mounting backlogs, the two OEM titanium sponge demand in the aerospace sector is expected to rise by 2027. For now, however, supply chain requirements for titanium application remain relatively weak, resulting in subdued demand for sponge. So this graph shows aircraft deliveries and US sponge import quantity. The value of light mode is double of first half results. Aircraft deliveries last year declined compared to 2023. While this year's deliveries may surpass last year's figures, they are unlikely to reach the levels seen in 2023, and US sponge imports last year and this year remain largely unchanged from 2023. reflecting sluggish demand from the aerospace sector. Now, focus on Titan Spon demand in the industrial sector. Significant growth in titanium demand for general industrial sector is not expected. Domestic demand in China remains sluggish due to a prolonged economic slowdown. Industrial demand in other regions also shown limited growth prospects. New demand is emerging in areas such as mobile applications like iPhone Air, but overall domestic consumption has seen only modest growth. Competitive Chinese milk products are gaining ground globally, supported by domestic sponge oversupply. And as a result, milk suppliers outside China, like Japan or Korea, are losing industry market share. This is evidence of my explanation. So Chinese milk products export increased in 2024, and Japan titanium milk product shipment decreased from 2024. Then, I'd like to explain Titan Spon supply outlook. So here are the topics for Spon suppliers last year and this year. Osaka formally announced their operating rate reduction. With Russian supplier plans to cut output. Chinese Spon suppliers rarely export to the US due to high additional tariffs this year. So, declining industrial demand among non-Chinese suppliers is expected to shift more Spon supply toward the aerospace sector. For now, the aerospace sector has access to sufficient Spon supply. That might be a good news to most of you here. So this is Titan Spon supply estimation. So in my estimation, this year's supply is lower than last year. So Spon suppliers may temporarily adjust their production plans in response to stagnant Titan Spon demand. While several suppliers are concerning capacity expansion, the economic feasibility of such a plan is still unclear. So this is Titan Spon outlook in the aerospace sector. Blue bar shows the demand for aerospace and military, and green line shows Spon supply excluding Russia, and green dot shows Spon supply including Russia. Chinese milk competition is driving industrial demand down, allowing aerospace-grade Spon suppliers to allocate up to 80% of capacity to aerospace. Although Russia has reduced its supply of milk products to the aerospace sector, so it is seeking to re-enter the market, and this possibility that cannot be ruled out. Chinese Spon supply to the aerospace sector is affected by tariffs and geopolitical risks, though OEMs appear increasingly willing to overlook geopolitical risks. Chinese Titan Spon industry outlook. The oversupply of Titan Spon in China is unlikely to be resolved in the near future. Despite their current oversupply, several Chinese Spon producers are passing capacity expansion plans backed by secured funding. Structural excess liquidity in the Chinese economy continues to exert pressure toward oversupply across industries like electric vehicle, steel, and titanium sponge. Chinese sponge remains cost competitive due to oversupply. Chinese sponge producers need to sell their entire output to maintain their cash flow. Sponge oversupply is benefiting Chinese mill suppliers and may open opportunities to expand their share in the aerospace sector. These are the evidence of my explanation. Chinese sponge production keep increasing and sponge utilization might be lower. And Chinese mill products export also continue to grow. Aerospace grade sponge demand and supply. The aerospace sector appears to have secured sufficient sponge for its supply chain for now. However, it remains unclear how long the current supply-demand balance will hold. Historically, sponge titanium demand in the aerospace supply chain has fluctuated significantly, and similar volatility may occur in the near future. And these factors may influence future sponge demand. And regarding tariff, while titanium mill products remain subject to reciprocal tariffs, titanium sponge is exempt. So there's no need to start dumping titanium sponge into Boston Harbor. So conclusion, the risk of a titanium sponge shortage persists despite adequate current supply. Sponge suppliers have begun adjusting production to match current demand, which may slow the response to any sudden sponge demand increase. Further expansion of sponge capacity for the aerospace sector remains uncertain. The sponge suppliers, including Toho, hesitate to expand capacity amid declining demand and unstable supply chain priorities. Finally, I'd like to deliver some message as usual. The aerospace supply chain could secure sponge supply by assuring stable sponge demand and favorable contract terms. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nakashima-san. Thank you. Our next speaker will give us the latest outlook on titanium scrap. Please welcome Chief Commercial Officer of ELG Utica Alloys, Nick Corby.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you to the members of the ITA and the staff who set this up, brought us to this lovely city here in Boston. Really enjoy the city and mostly the people here at the conference. So we'll try and get through this here. So we're going to talk about titanium scrap today, and we'll try and look at it from a little bit of a statistical manner, and we'll get right into it. So forward-looking statements, ELG Utica Alloys is owned by Operam, a public stainless steel producer in Europe. So we are obligated to tell you that whatever we say in this is can't be used for investment purposes or otherwise. So please ignore me. Topics of discussion, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ELG Utica Alloys Group, the impact of using scrap, how it looks and what it does for our environment, carbon CO2 reduction. Talk a little bit about the supply chain, how the material comes to market and how it's consumed, and then finally scrap trends, which is the meat of the presentation. So with the ELG Utica Alloys Group, we are in one division called Operam Recycling. Within that division, we are in the ELG Group, and along with our sister company, ELG Stainless Steel, we have over 50 sites in 18 countries on 5 continents. We use that network to help manage scrap across the world. Australia, you pick a continent, save Antarctica, we're pulling scrap out of there for the industry and processing it in Europe and in the US. Titanium facilities, processing facilities in Hartford, Connecticut, and in Duisburg, Germany. Nickel processing facilities in Lyon, France, Sheffield, UK, and Herkimer, New York. We leverage these sites to service the hotspots, the growing areas in the supply chain so that we can bring the scrap to market. When we talk about using the impact of scrap, I mean, this is a truly wonderful thing when we talk in the world that we live in, where our ultimate customers are demanding that we reduce CO2. Every pound of scrap that you consume, as opposed to prime sponge and master alloy, you're reducing your carbon footprint by 95.4%. Been doing the right thing for 40 years here, so really quite proud of that. And as much flying as we do, this is a saver here. You can feel good about yourself if you're consuming more scrap but still flying on an airplane here. Moving into the scrap supply chain, I'm a picture guy, so really simple. Where does the scrap get generated? It's at a machine shop. You have turnings and off-cuttings, clippings, plate drops, billets. We've all seen them in this industry. And then material generated and collected on site, transported to a trader or to a processor, and then eventually brought into the melter. And just a very easy slide to see visually what we're talking about here, and many different methods for it to be delivered to market. At times, either a company like mine, the ELG, will own the material throughout the process, or we have tolling contracts with OEMs where they own the material, but we provide the service along the way as we bring the material back for the melters to be consumed. And this is a diagrammed representation of that flow. So, it starts with the melter. Through their processing internally, they generate their own home scrap as they machine, as they forge, depending upon what their capabilities are within their own company. And as the material progresses down the supply chain into the machine shops, they're generating additional scraps which are being collected. And along the way, within all of this, ELG and its competitors are picking scrap up, bringing it back, having it processed, and then delivering it back to the melters. Overall, from a value chain standpoint, as I mentioned, we talk about the traditional trading, buying and selling of products, where we take the risk on the material from a market perspective, and then we growingly work with our customers, both OEMs and melters, to process their scrap, handle their scrap on their behalf, and then take the financial risk out of it and just perform a service for a processing fee. So overall, again, with facilities globally, 5 continents, we're able to do this in Southeast Asia, we're able to do this in Japan and Europe and in the US as well. So moving on to scrap trends, here's a eye chart from the beginning of time in what was metal prices, but now is Argus Media. And as you can see, it's actually quite flat, save 2005 when there was a sponge shortage. Good times, Mr. Nakashima, right? And with the ramp up of the 787, demand was high. There wasn't enough sponge. There wasn't enough scrap being generated because it was the front end of the cycle, and prices went well, they were unhealthy. They were wildly high. So, but in general, you see a pretty flat trend overall. As you focus on 5 years, you do see some variation overall, but in general, the price of scrap is going to be capped by sponge and alloy on the top end and ferrite on the bottom end. So, it's always going to be about how much supply is out there and how much the melters can consume, and how much is good quality aerospace scrap. So when we look at the growth, and admittedly this is US focused, but this is where probably 95% of aerospace scrap is consumed in melting. You can look at the growth of the melt capacity in the US and see, in 30 years, this growth is quite extraordinary. And along with that, with each new furnace, the melters are committing and making a conscious decision to buy furnaces that consume scrap well, meaning in most part, cold hearth furnaces, either a plasma or an EB furnace, which consume scrap. So what you're seeing here is over the next 2 years, the capability to consume more scrap goes up by 20,000 tons. That probably will not happen, but the capability, the ability to go there is now on the table. And where that's important is that you have to have the demand, right? So Airbus and Boeing have to place orders, and you also have to have the supply. So right now, we have a supply chain that I think we all understand is very unsettled. There's bubbles everywhere within the supply chain, too many parts in different places. And so as I went through and looked at the numbers, decided to compare airplane deliveries to scrap imports to see whether there was any relationship. And what I found for me was interesting in that when you look at it and say the super cycle of the 2010s was perfect. And when you look at those numbers, you have a 0.89 correlation. It's a pretty good correlation, which tells you that when the supply chain is full, because the US melters have the most scrap consumption capabilities, the material is going to flow in. And it stands to reason that, hey, coming out of COVID, the correlation would be lower because parts were machined when they weren't needed to be. The scrap didn't go into the furnaces because they were already full and we didn't have the new capacity online, or it was sold into ferrite because people needed cash as interest rates went up, things of that nature. And that is true, but there's another piece to this that is really interesting. So we're going to talk a little bit right here about, right now, we are on pace to have the highest scrap import number in the history of titanium scrap this year. And I think all of us understand that at this point, we don't think the supply chain is flush. We don't think that it's full and it's not running on all cylinders. There's problems up and down the supply chain, not just on the titanium side, but seats for airplanes and engines and everything else. So thinking about this, how are we not making as many parts to support the demand? How are the orders slower, and yet we're still seeing so much scrap? And there's two pieces here. One, the decoupling from VSMPO, where their scrap was generated in Russia and generally speaking was only consumed in ferrite. So that scrap never made it to market previously. But the second piece is that some of the aerospace work has now moved to China. So overall, when you look at this, we're now in a situation where China this year will ship almost 6,000 tons of scrap. It will export almost 6,000 tons of scrap out of China. Ultimately, likely, the vast majority of it coming into the US, which is why we're seeing scrap availability that would appear to be inconsistent with where we are in our supply chain and our build rates and all these things. Overall, is there a problem with that? No, but it is a shift. And as we've talked about, the regionality of scrap generation and remelts and all these things, this is a new wrinkle in the entire program. And as we sit in the U.S. and I talk about U.S. melters, if this amount of scrap is being generated, there's other questions that have to be asked. So inherently, this will beg the question eventually of, excuse me, where are the next furnaces going to be built? I think higher interest rates in the U.S., higher interest rates in Europe. Where are those furnaces going to be built? And again, I would say that in general, Asia is a little less conservative when it comes to making these larger investments. And so it stands to reason that the next spate of large melt investments will be done in Asia and starting to consume the scrap. So with that, quick topic discussion. Talked about ELG Utica Alloys Group, the impacts using scrap supply chain, scrap trends. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. I would like to leave you with two numbers. 41-33. Philadelphia Eagles over the New York Patriots in 2018. And for you Pittsburgh fans, the Eagles have as many wins against the Patriots in the playoffs as the Steelers. So, sorry, Andy, couldn't resist. Thank you for your attention. Have a great day.
Sounds to me like scrap prices just went lower. Just kidding. Thank you, Nick. Our next topic of discussion is going to be Master Alloys. Here to share his insights on the matter is Mike Wilkes, the Director of Aerospace and Medical at Chimera International. Mike.
All right, thank you, Andy. Hi, all. How we doing out there? Huh? Coming to an end. There's good news, really good news, because when we're going to talk about Master Alloy for the next 15 minutes, I guarantee it's going to keep you awake. Okay, so just bear with me. Now, here to talk to you guys about Master Alloy, its role, if you will, in the making of titanium. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the production process, how it's used in the making of titanium, and then we'll get into just some of the different types of Master Alloy that are available, and then I'll leave you with some closing thoughts at the end. So Master Alloy for titanium melting, it's a combination of two or more metals in the metallurgical alloyed form, added with base metals into melted charge to achieve that desired final ingot chemistry. Available in various forms, can be put into powder, granules, aggregate, whatever meets your needs. And one thing about the process that we're going to be, that I'll be sharing here in a moment, it's a very precise process that is very controlled and regulates the chemistry to ensure that there's no non-metallic inclusions, because that's certainly essential in its end-use applications. So the process, let's break this down. Coming across the top here, there's aluminum powder and high purity oxides that are used as the raw materials. These get up to very high temperature during the reaction, and the reaction is fueled by and gets its energy from the aluminum that's in that mix. What you end up doing, now we're getting down into the middle section of that of the chart, where we will ignite it. Once it gets ignited, it's not a very long process. It doesn't take very long for it to go through its entire reaction. Maybe 90 seconds plus or minus, depending on the alloy. At that point, after it's done, it will solidify. We will crush it, we'll size it, and inspect it. And get it ready for shipment. Typical thermite alloys are the aluminum, vanadium. That is the real workhorse. So Ti-6-4, as I'm sure many have heard of before, you can get your aluminum and vanadium units from a Master Alloy. There's also the aluminum molybdenum, aluminum niobium, aluminum chromes, many more also, but those are some of the key ones that get made through Alumithermic. Typical size sold is maybe say a 10 millimeter by down, but again, that can be subject to end use customer, what works best for them and what they require for it to continue on and make titanium. Keys to the aerospace is quality, as we all know. It's a robust raw material supply chain. That's good. It's refractory-free melting practices. We have inline automated inspection techniques, and for the vanadiums, we use X-ray technology to look for high-density inclusions that might be in there, because we certainly don't want those in the material. And we really do follow a very rigorous quality management system. And on-site at Chimera at Ready Alloys, we do have accredited labs, NADCAP accredited, and we do all of our own internal inspections and testing and certifying. Use of master alloys. So you've heard about sponge, you've heard about scrap. So this, I think, is fitting. Now we're going to hear about the master alloy component that you can use to make titanium. So master alloy will get mixed, if you will, or get compacted with sponge into these briquettes. They'll have, that could be the tie scrap put with that. They'll put into electrodes, could be, and then go into cold hearth melting. Also, might go through some VAR after that, some AccuMark remelting to ultimately get down to that final tie ingot. So there is advantages in melting the technology, enhanced ability to remelt greater quantities. So one thing that we do watch, and what will control some of the demand, if you will, for a master alloy is some of those price differentials that you've heard about between scrap. Obviously, Mr. Corby's price is just going down because of his comments about the Eagles, which is my team, by the way. So we'll let it slide, but so those are things that we watch, right? So the supply of your scrap, pricing of that is also just plays a role in the raw materials that are used. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Talked about ALV, aluminum, vanadium, molybdenum, niobium. These are key ones. Again, vanadium master alloy, that is that workhorse to make the Ti 6-4. Also on the moly side, about 10% by weight of the Ti master alloy sold. Usually it's binary. It can be as just aluminum with moly, but it can also be aluminum, moly, and titanium to get the necessary units, if you will, from the master alloy itself, that then get used into the production and making of a Ti 6242, 6246, moly Ti, and so forth. Niobium, I'll talk a little bit about it in just a moment, but it's one of the lesser of the master alloys, but also it's an important one. It's used in the making of Ti 6-7 that we know goes into end-use medical applications, but it can also be used getting the niobium for some high-temperature Ti aluminides. In addition to all that, we are also master alloys can be produced to form what we call a multi-master alloy, where it'll certainly have the aluminum maybe and the vanadium or the molybdenum, but also carry with it, you can get units of zirconium, chrome, silicon, tin, that also get put into that mixture that ends up producing a master alloy that might meet your need and have get the extra units that you want, other than the most common ones. So those are typically tailored to customer specifications because they're typically very unique. But just wanted to provide that we are able to make those as well. Key ingredients: vanadium pentoxide. It's one of the key ingredients that's used in all of our master alloy that will end up with some vanadium unit, some percentage content, if you will, in the material. It's used for ferrovanadium, that's used in the steel industry, so it's only a small fraction, the V2O5 that gets used for this particular application that's produced to this real high purity form that we put into our master alloy. You have molybdenum trioxide, moly-rich ore gets extracted, creates a MO3, what we call it. That's used in ferromolybdenum for the worldwide steel industry as well, and master alloys is a minor component of it, but again, a very key and critical one that's used in making, that's needed. And then we have the niobium pentoxide that's used in ferroniobium for steel industry and nickel niobium for the superalloys. So oftentimes the niobium also, as I mentioned earlier, can go into the making of Ti-6-7 is a common one, but it also, or in high temperature applications, it's also used for the melters making the high temp alloys. V2O5, just wanted to share a little bit about the trend where it's at right now. So, there was a moment in time here where it really, ticked up back there in 2018, 19. That's almost a 4X over where it is today. Today, it's down at some pretty low levels. It's just a law of supply and demand at the moment. But it is something certainly that we watch. They believe the vanadium pentoxide market expected to grow at a CAGR of 8.8%, again, being driven by the steel industry mainly. But also, and I've done this presentation several times over the years, Andy's allowed me to do it, and the red box flow batteries, it is something we watch because it is used in that. So we keep our eye on it. It hasn't made any significant moves in terms of influencing the market. There's been delays in projects that could keep this tight, but again, it is something that we do watch because of V2O5 being such a vital component to the making of titanium. So you have two outcomes here. You have the bullish and the bearish. The VRB deployments, if they get accelerated, steel market recovers while new supply is slow to ramp. That would be your bullish, I think, market. And then your bearish would be the influx of new supply, and then possibly combined weaker Asia steel demand could reduce, and which will push the prices lower. So key, I think, is the timing of these projects. That'll be the real swing factor as we continue to move forward. Watch points, kind of said it, just wanted to repeat. There is a quiz at the end of this, so just make sure you're paying attention. Asia construction and steel cycle, keep an eye on that. Timing of new mine processing capabilities, competing long-term duration of the batteries, and policy and trade interventions. So they'll be the key, some key, not the key, but just some watch points that I wanted to share with you. Let's move on to molybdenum, moly trioxide again on my right. So the molybdenum trioxide trend, a little bit different, right? So your pricing right now is actually up. I'd say it's not at the highest, but it is certainly trending, and actually trending has kind of been steady now for a little while, hanging into that that range where it was lower than that several years ago. So you just watch the production. China remains the largest producer of it, and we keep an eye on that. In addition, with the molybdenum, they're projecting a 2.5% CAGR over the time period. This is out through 2032. Aerospace, defense, energy sectors in North America they'll probably be the fastest growing, which will really control and drive that market more so than others. Asia Pacific has high consumption in steel production. They're expected to dominate it. And you have global push toward carbon neutrality and cleaner energy sources. That's accelerating demand for that renewable infrastructure, where moly plays a very vital role in that. So just might want to, if you're investors, monitor the renewable sector. Niobium, again, not so, not as from a usage standpoint, not near that of our vanadium and molybdenum, but it is one that we do make and enjoy. Global, the niobium market's expected to grow 6% CAGR again out through 2032. It had breached, if you will, over 100 metric tons in 2024. Brazil, by far, graph down there at the bottom, is the world's largest producer of niobium, accounting for approximately 92%. So the growth drivers and risk factors that you want to look at with niobium that we tend to keep our eye on, there's demand, still demand. The lightweighting, I used to call it, I used to be in this, in an automotive market in my prior life, and I called it the lightweight trend that was starting, which was probably 20 years ago. But niobium could play a key part in that, getting weight out of automotive vehicles to improve their gas mileage. So risk is, again, heavy reliance on one supplier supplying the global production. So, all right, quiz time. Oh, shoot. All right, I thought I had a blank screen. Gave you the answers already now. Just in summary, short-term demand dynamics for master alloy elements mainly influenced. Okay, these aren't all of them, but just things to think about and ponder as I do every day. The availability of Thai scrap, as I mentioned, your inventory levels throughout those supply chains, and certainly geopolitical situation that can probably go without saying. But longer trend terms suggest continued unpredictability in key master alloy elements, the continued supply surges and dips in the global steel market led by China. Watch this dynamic. New technologies for the green energy storage. Again, it's been around for a while, but it's something we've really got to keep our eye on. Demand for sustainable energy grows, and as it has been mentioned, additional capacity coming online here in North America. So continuous risk management is recommended. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Andy, for having me. And have a great rest of your conference.
Thanks, Mike. All right, today's final speaker is Dr. Niels Bakkeberg, founder and director at Project Blue. Niels' presentation is going to focus on maybe the larger geopolitical dynamics that are happening that are impacting the supply chain. So please welcome Dr. Bakkeberg.
Thank you, Andy. And yes, hi, thank you for sticking through to the end. I thought you were allowing everyone to leave after yours with your introduction of making it this far, but thank you for keeping me around. My name's Niels. It's a pleasure for my first titanium conference, so thanks for having us here. I wanted to take the opportunity to just give a quick introduction to Project Blue, what it is we do, and I think the introduction or the conversations we've had in this panel on the different commodities gives me quite a nice platform to do so. And then I'll go into some new data that we've been putting together, which allows us to dig into some of the details and create some beautiful graphics. So who are we? We're an independent market intelligence company looking at critical materials and across energy transition technologies. We're headquartered in the UK. I'm from South Africa, and we've got a new team in Washington, DC, as well as a team in China, in Xi'an, that helps us with supporting the analysis. So we build together supply-demand models, forecasting, and understanding the risks and bottlenecks in supply chains. We differentiate ourselves with a broad range in coverage. We try to replicate the periodic table, as you can see here. And that really underpins the research. And what's unique with some of the stuff we can do is identify cross-cutting narratives. So I'm new to titanium in a sense, but I've been looking at it now for 2 years and really enjoying the nuances of the industry. But we heard earlier about monazite being part of the heavy mineral sands, and Rio Tinto was one of the first monazite exporters to China for rare earth recovery. And you see Tronox investing quite heavily in Australia, building out rare earth facilities related to their titanium deposits. Talking about molybdenum, you got the byproducts coming out of the copper industry in South America, and rhenium, which is also a crucial aerospace raw material that allows us all to spend over 15 hours in the air. We can argue if that's good or bad, comes as a byproduct of the byproduct molybdenum. So there are nuances and correlations between all these commodities. We heard about vanadium redox flow batteries. They're actually picking up in China with quite a lot of installations, but also surplus supply. So hence the price developments that you see there. So this is where we play. We do not lift physical materials. We play with the data. We provide our independent research. And it's really crucial for us to be in the room with you and the different commodity sectors to have the conversations that we can keep improving our research. It is underpinned by our own analysis. We've got our own aerospace model and various other sectors that leads in. My colleague Katlego presented earlier on some of the lithium-ion battery research and autoclaves for nickel cobalt MHP processing, where titanium is finding some applications. And so for today, what I wanted to do is really focus in on some of our aerospace research. So we've had to, by going into titanium and rhenium, really understand this market and what the developments are in there. So, what have we done? Sounds terrible, but anyways, so we've taken the data available on aircraft deliveries and we've built out the details. So tracking out the different aircraft models across commercial, private, and military to understand deliveries and what this means for raw materials. We take the data that Boeing and Airbus kindly share on a monthly basis and inform our views and look at the forecast, and we make our own analysis based on our raw material analysis and bottlenecks, what that all looks like. So we've taken over 450 aircraft models and UAVs and stripped them basically for their parts. We are academics and analysts, so there's simplified versions of that. And we've done the same for aircraft engines. And then what we've been able to build is a superalloy model. So trying to understand what parts require what types of alloys and where those developments can go. And so we can start to map this out and lead back to the raw material requirements. On top of that, this is something that we're busy doing, is understanding the buy-to-fly ratios that we've been understanding, and we can now do that on a part-by-part basis, which allows us then to talk about potential feedstock, what that raw material is looking like, when that comes to the market, what's the end of life of engines, what's the maintenance cycle for the different parts. Really sort of a data nerd's dream. So that's why we're here. Here is a snapshot. So we've put this as lots of data. So this is putting out into a Power BI database. If you want to look at the detail of this, we can click on Airbus and it will rearrange the raw material requirement for Airbus, Boeing. We can also look at COMAC, which is, I'm going to come back to that conversation. And we can understand what are the different alloys going into the different parts. These are just the summarized graphics. It really goes down into the raw material detail. So that punches out that inverted Christmas tree is probably the wrong terminology for the graphic, but that's what I stick to. But you can see that, including iron, titanium is the third most consumed material in an aircraft frame. What else did I want to say here? Obviously, so fundamentally, the overall picture of deliveries, which is shown on the bottom left, this is now converted into weights of alloys. I need to double check the units. It's 150 million, but I think that's kilograms. On the scale on the left-hand side, showing you what's the volume of superalloys. And this accounts for about 50% of the superalloy market. We're busy finishing this off as well for internal gas turbines, and so industrial. Did the same thing for engines, and you can see there titanium still plotting in sort of the top 10 raw materials going into engines, with cobalt and nickel really crucial for that market. And on comparison, you can see, if you go back to the airframes to see if this works, very much lightweighting alloys dominating that structure, whereas if you go into engine, it's your nickel-based alloys that underpin most of that demand. And if you go into the details, you can understand where the Rhine or Inconel alloys are being used in what parts. And then again, we've built this in a way you can go through the different OEMs and understand what is their raw material nuances to one another based on the alloys that are being used. Now, the disclaimer here is lots of assumptions, and again, this is why I'm here to show you what we've done, and I need to talk to all of you, and so that we can fine-tune it and ask the right questions to this database and go into a bit more detail. So we build this because we feed this into our raw material analysis so that we can understand what's the future in the supply chain. But what we're also able to do here is start to dig into the details of what, and this is now just for titanium, what's the percentage or the intensity of use in titanium in different types of aircraft on the left, and also averaged across the different OEMs and engines on the right. We can break this apart in whatever way. So now this is looking at also the line on the very left for narrow body. These are all narrow body aircraft put together. We could do this on a program by program basis, but doing that really highlights where our assumptions might be. So again, this is where we need to have the conversations and understand the requirements of the different raw materials. I've just come from presenting this on magnesium, so we was talking about the substitution of magnesium alloys, going into the different generations, and we had a graphic illustrating how magnesium is used differently. Though the volume of demand is still increasing because magnesium is also alloyed into other composite alloys in the process, but you can see on the military side, the fighter jets and bombers, much more higher intensity of use of the titanium, vanadium, aluminum alloys in there. So we get to pick out some of these details and ask some of the questions, where is this going? Excuse the units here on this graphic, please. As I've mentioned, I've just come from magnesium, and before that I was presenting this for tantalum and niobium. Hence, this still says tons titanium. This should say kilotons at the bottom left. Just for reference, the right-hand graphic, this is cumulative demand of titanium across 20 years, including forecast to 2035. So that's not annual titanium demand. But you can see where the volumes are going. It's the fuselage and main body, sort of the main driver for titanium units, right? So this is not talking at the alloy. So if titanium's in other parts of other alloys, this is included in that analysis, as shown in the pie chart. We can start to split out different aircrafts, as I've said, on a program by program basis to understand what alloys are being used in the military applications. We've also just published an article here looking at metals and the security of nations, looking at specifically UAVs and military aircraft and the different alloys used. If you go to our website, you can request a free copy of that or come find me. I've got a few free ones with me today. So we can do the same thing for jet engines, right? Looking at the turbines and fan blades. Many of you may know this, like that is the big volume demand growth. But what we're then able to do with this now is to start to think about buy-to-fly ratios and different generations and try to analyze what is the composition of these raw materials coming online. And then if we look at end of life and recycling, what types of materials are coming back into the market and when, so that you can project forward and sort of plan for different raw materials coming into the market. Again, the units, please excuse those. So this is coming into a little bit of the narrative in here. So we've heard obviously from Airbus and Boeing and the direction of travel, the supply security. We heard about sponge capacity, sort of cautiously waiting for new demand or for demand to recover, whereas the mill capacity ramping up. And some of the replacement related to the conflicts between Russia and the Ukraine. And at the same time, we model our recovery in the aircraft demand based on what Boeing and Airbus put together with, I'll show you on the next slide a few scenarios of what that could look like. But also we have the introduction of COMAC to the market, delivering of new aircraft, and I think it plays a very interesting role in overall supply chains. We heard earlier a conversation about semiconductors and between the US and China, essentially the chip wars with restrictions of IP from the US and China responding with restrictions of raw materials. And when you look to where those raw materials are available, this is a lever that the Chinese supply chain can do to the markets. And we've seen the development and increase in sponge and mill production in China, building up its experience and expertise in the sector. So this is something to be aware of as the market recovers. COMAC still in early stages, not in the near term, sort of a volume question. But with geopolitical relations in the pipeline, we've seen investments and stockpiling of things like rhenium and at the moment hafnium, which is disrupting the market. Now, for certain engines, if hafnium and rhenium aren't available, you need to redesign the whole engine. And again, rhenium, as I mentioned earlier, is a byproduct of a byproduct that only comes from South American copper, which is being challenged by copper out of the DRC, which is cobalt. So again, you can start to map out all of these nuances and understanding what parts are exposed to different commodities. We can try to understand those risks and try to help the whole value chain mitigate those and understand where those bottlenecks may occur. Lastly, just to show you some of the narratives, I think we've got the trends in the aerospace, we saw the recoveries in revenue passenger kilometers return. And then we heard this morning, if the utilization efficiency of aircrafts don't keep pace, then there'll be a requirement for additional aircraft to keep pace with the additional demand. So there is quite a range in potential outlook here, but really with the supply chain concerns, this is taking into account that 40,000 aircrafts are delivered by 2044. So it does require a significant ramp up in aircraft deliveries. There are low case scenarios to that, and those are related to as well changes in consumer behavior. You've got energy transition. There's conversations about short haul flights and high speed trains coming into competition. And all sorts of environments changing that. I think we noticed from post-COVID that Teams didn't manage to completely replace air travel, and I guess we're all happy to be here for that. And then lastly, as the discussion is talking about the military, we heard a lot about that yesterday, and there's a lot of investments in military spending coming online at this point in time. And for titanium, just looking at this isn't the mill and sponge demand number for titanium. This is the titanium delivered in the final aircraft number that you're seeing here. So your buy-to-fly ratio still needs to be added onto this, right? And so in this sense, military accounts for around a fifth of the titanium market in aerospace, right? And this is really where we're seeing some interesting developments. And what does this do? And when we're looking at various commodities, is the security of supply is becoming quite crucial in this narrative. We heard now about investing in potentially higher cost supply chains for that security. And again, this isn't a unique narrative to titanium. This is in every commodity out there. Rare earths is one, these high-powered magnets that are enablers of various technologies, gallium, germanium for sensors and semiconductors, antimony for bullets and also semiconductors and various other things are all sort of central to policies that are being made right now. And I think titanium, having looked at it now for the last years myself, identifying those narratives, the importance of the Russian-Ukraine supply chain and how the rest of the world is responding to build out new supply chains, Saudi Arabia coming into the mix, China building up, redirecting some feedstock, investing in the pigment sector as well to secure feedstock supply. We saw about the investment in Mozambique on the minerals side. So there are a lot of developments here, and what we've been seeing over the last few months and years is how critical materials are becoming quite central to policy developments. So it's something to be aware of, and we will see continued growth in these markets and raw material requirements, so there'll be more pressure being put on these supply chains. So final words from my side. I put my disclaimer at the end, so if you thought you could use, no, please go. No, but I hope you enjoyed the narratives. This is our job, is to go out, put together analysis, and so please do come talk to us. We're very keen to hear from you and learn from you. So thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew, for having me.
All right, thank you, Niels. I guess we have time. We want to open the floor for any questions anyone might have for the panelists. Anybody? Somebody has to have a question. All right, well, if you do, and you want to just, speak one-on-one to any one of these guys, I'm sure they'll stick around for a few minutes if you'd like, so please just come on up. Thank you.